So let's look at product for a little bit and see if we can experiment and talk about how we can make this difference. So what's the one thing that has defined the human species through the ages? Demonstrates our power and authority, supports our spiritual beliefs, illustrates cultural sophistication, protects us from harm, and inherently interdisciplinary across sectors. So I say to you, that's buildings and infrastructure. Let me explain what I mean. Okay? So first, buildings recount lost civilizations. Ancient Egypt. Without the pyramids jutting up through the sand, would we even know that civilization existed? Okay, it was the structures. Mayan civilization in the jungle. Again, the temples and the pyramids coming out of the trees, out of the forest. I remember a few months back in the Toronto Star, there was a photograph and an article that said we had found a new culture, a new group of people living in the Amazon rainforest. And we found that because a satellite took an image of their roof lines inside the jungle. Without that, we would still not know that they were there, right? Roman Empire, 337 AD, was the largest city in the world. Today, the Colosseum is still there. We don't tear these buildings down, we revere them. Right? They're a very important part of our human psyche. No matter how much you restore your automobile and how long you try and keep it for, it does not have quite the longevity as a building and a structure does it? Buildings have defined cultural identity, icons of culture. We look at these images and we know what country they're from. We have a sense of the architectural style and marvels that are out there. Japan, Korea, India, others. We plan our vacations around going to see some of these structures. The romance of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, Big Ben. We revere our architects. You look at people like Frank Lloyd Wright, who was really not that good of a guy, but at the same time we revere him for his accomplishments in architecture. Buildings have established artistic movements. If we look at the whole Renaissance era, starting off with the Romanesque, then on to the Gothic, and finally culminating in the Baroque period, the High Renaissance, where the idea of dividing your expertise into sectors just didn't exist. You had people like Brunelleschi, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. These gentlemen were astronomers, right? They were architects, engineers. Amazing the different fields that they were experts in. And then we had buildings that really stood out as beacons of this high period, right? And now we have modern architecture, our ability to build up, our scale capacity. That really defines us today. So fact review, we know that populations will grow to 9 billion people by 2050. People are moving to urban centers, and urban societies globally spend 90% of their time inside buildings. 90% of our time. Architectural design is really historically considered one of the primary benchmarks for economic, cultural success, part of our triple bottom line. But they're also potential part of the solution to climate change. 40% of carbon emissions comes from buildings. 40%. That's more than the transportation sector, more than industry. Buildings. They're where we live, where we work, where we play. That's our triple bottom line, right? Coming back to that. Now the question here now, sustainable green building design, can this new architectural movement drive the change required in this sector? Big question, right? Let's look at some market trends. So first, Canaccord Adams put out a report in 2008, November, made 3 crucial statements. First of all, that despite the economic environment, green buildings continue to gain momentum and move into the mainstream. 70% of builders think green is here to stay and will continue to gain traction despite obstacles. And green building-focused companies are at an advantage during this economic market downturn. We did a report in partnership with McGraw-Hill Construction, launched it in September 2008 in Melbourne, Australia, and we interviewed 700 top design construction firms around the world that are already confident in green, basically meaning 60% of their portfolio is focused on green projects. We did this to gauge the level of activity around the world, looked at market growth, looked at triggers and obstacles, also what are the green practices, and also what green home building products are in the trends that are happening today. Interesting what we found out. Basically, they're telling us that the market will shift to green. It will double by 2013. The focus is really about portfolio change towards green infrastructure. Now we look at the global construction output for 2007. Obviously, we have to take account for some of the issues right now economically, but at that time, it was $4.7 trillion industry. More than 100 million people are employed worldwide in this sector, and 10% of the global gross domestic product. So there's two opportunities here. First one is obviously our aging, existing infrastructure. We can't ignore this. We've got to do something about what exists now. How are we going to manage that? Big obstacle. First, historic retrofits. That makes sense. You know, there's something appealing and heartwarming about being in a building that's been restored and has that cultural feel to it. The problem is the crap that was built between the 50s and 70s, that existing urban stock. What do we do with this stuff? I mean, this is really ugly, right? We look at some of the work that's being done around the world. One in particular, Peter Busby, a friend of mine, did a great project in BC. He took the old Telus building and did a skinning project where he basically turned this into a very green building and reused the building that was on site and made it really a brand new, vibrant project. So that's one opportunity, right? We need to think of other ways of reusing our existing stock. And of course, new building design, that's the sexiness of green buildings. Doing something from scratch, that's the engagement tool as far as I'm concerned, right? We look at things like high-rise office buildings for density. This one picture in the middle, it looks like Swiss cheese, but the top part of that is all wind turbines, generating 30% of the energy for that building. The building on the left is the new Chicago Spear Tower, aiming for LEED Platinum, and it's shaped like that to take advantage of wind currents. This one here, also being designed by Peter Busby, being built in Dubai. Bit of a struggle right now, considering Dubai's on a bit of a shutdown. But this project itself is designed like airplane wings, so that it takes wind and channels it through the two buildings, rotating that 40-foot vertical axis wind turbine, generating 30 to 40% of the energy for that building. Commercial and retail buildings are really taking on the idea of live, work, play, about the idea of interaction socially, transportation, shopping, socializing, eating, right? As long as we can make this green and continue down this path, it's an opportunity. I love this project here for housing. The building on the left there is clad with license plates. So people can get creative with their home building designs, right?